Steve Harvey had hosted Family Feud for over 15 years, and throughout that remarkable tenure, he had witnessed the full spectrum of human behavior on his stage. He had seen families at their best, demonstrating love, support, and genuine joy in each other's company. He had also occasionally witnessed moments that revealed the darker aspects of human nature, prejudices that people carried beneath polite surfaces. But nothing in his extensive experience could have prepared him for what would unfold on a Friday afternoon in January 2025, when a single phrase would expose a particularly vicious form of racism and force Steve to confront hatred in one of its most insidious manifestations. This is a story about standing up against the model minority myth, about defending the dignity of Asian Americans who face discrimination disguised as compliments, and about why silence in the face of racism directed at any community makes all of us complicit. If you believe that every family deserves respect regardless of their heritage, make sure to like and subscribe to this channel, because what happened next will demonstrate why some moments demand that we speak up even when our voices shake. The Chen family from San Francisco, California stood on one side of the Family Feud stage, representing 3 generations of achievement, sacrifice, and the complex reality of the Asian American experience. The family was led by 68-year-old James Chen, who had immigrated to the United States from Taiwan in 1979 with nothing but a suitcase, $200, and an engineering degree that American employers initially refused to recognize. He had worked as a janitor for 3 years while retaking engineering exams and fighting for credential recognition, eventually building a career that spanned 4 decades at a major aerospace company. His wife, Margaret Chen, 65 years old, had been a public school teacher for 38 years, teaching mathematics to middle school students and often staying late to tutor children who struggled with the subject. Their adult children stood beside them, each carrying their own stories of navigating life as Asian Americans in a country that often viewed them through a narrow and limiting lens. Their eldest son, David Chen, was a trauma surgeon who had spent the past 2 years working exhausting shifts during the pandemic, saving countless lives while also experiencing a disturbing rise in verbal and physical attacks against Asian Americans. Their daughter, Lisa Chen, was a social worker specializing in immigrant and refugee services, helping families navigate complex systems while also advocating for policy changes. Their youngest, Michael Chen, was a high school music teacher who had dedicated his career to making arts education accessible to underprivileged students. The Chen family represented the reality that contradicted easy stereotypes. They were not the model minority myth that portrayed all Asian Americans as uniformly successful and problem-free. They were real people who had faced discrimination, struggled with mental health challenges, navigated cultural tensions between their heritage and American society, and worked extraordinarily hard to achieve success that others often attributed to innate ability rather than effort and perseverance. They had come to Family Feud to celebrate their family bonds, to have fun together, and to share their story with America. On the opposite side of the stage stood the Patterson family from Tennessee, led by 49-year-old Donald Patterson, a small business owner who ran a construction company, and his wife Corinne. The Patterson family presented themselves as proud Americans who valued hard work, traditional values, and what they described as common sense. Their adult children, all in their 20s, had followed their father into the family business or pursued careers in fields that kept them close to their rural community. On the surface, they appeared to be a typical American family competing for prizes and enjoying the experience of being on television. Steve Harvey walked onto the stage with his characteristic warmth and enthusiasm, ready to facilitate what he hoped would be another entertaining and uplifting episode. He had reviewed both family introductions and was particularly moved by the Chen family's story. James Chen's journey from immigrant janitor to respected aerospace engineer embodied the American dream in its truest form, and Steve looked forward to highlighting that narrative. He wanted to celebrate the Chen family's contributions to their communities and to showcase the diversity that made America stronger. The game began with both families demonstrating competitive spirit and quick thinking. The Chen family took an early lead, with James showing impressive recall and his children providing thoughtful answers that reflected both intelligence and cultural awareness. Margaret Chen delighted the audience with her warm personality and sharp wit. The Patterson family remained in the game, and the competition proceeded through the first 3 rounds with the usual excitement and good-natured rivalry that characterized Family Feud at its best. The moment that would shatter the friendly atmosphere came during the 4th round, when the question on the board asked contestants to name something people do to relax after a stressful day. Chen stepped up to the podium and provided an answer that reflected her cultural background and personal experience. She said, "Drink tea and meditate." It was a perfectly valid answer, thoughtful and reflective of practices that millions of Americans engaged in regularly, regardless of their cultural background. Before Steve could even turn to check the survey board, Donald Patterson's voice cut through the studio with a comment that made everyone freeze. His words were delivered with a smirk and a tone that combined condescension with barely concealed hostility. He said, loud enough for the microphones to capture clearly, "Well, that's adorable. Maybe if you people spent less time meditating and more time remembering this is America, you'd give American answers. But I guess some people need to learn to know their place." The studio fell into a shocked, suffocating silence. The phrase, "know their place," hung in the air like poison, carrying with it centuries of racist rhetoric used to keep marginalized groups subordinate. The Chen family members visibly recoiled, their earlier joy and enthusiasm evaporating instantly. David Chen, the trauma surgeon who had spent years saving lives, including those of people who might harbor similar prejudices, looked as though he had been physically struck. Chen, who had been smiling just moments before, stood frozen at the podium, her face showing a mixture of shock, hurt, and profound anger. Chen reached for her husband's hand, her eyes filling with tears. Chen's expression showed the particular pain of someone who had spent 46 years in America, who had worked tirelessly to build a life and contribute to his adopted country, only to be told he did not belong. Harvey stopped moving entirely. The transformation was immediate and complete. His body went rigid, his face cycling through a rapid progression of emotions that the cameras captured in excruciating detail. First came disbelief, his mind struggling to process what he had just heard. Then came recognition, the awful understanding that yes, this had actually happened, that this level of racism had just been broadcast on his stage. Finally came something that viewers would later describe as a cold fury, a controlled rage that was somehow more powerful than any explosion of anger could have been. For several long seconds, Steve simply stood there, frozen. The studio remained silent, everyone waiting to see how he would respond. The production crew did not know whether to keep rolling or to cut. The audience sat in stunned uncertainty, and the Chen family stood together, united in their shock and pain, waiting to see whether they would be defended or whether this moment would pass without acknowledgement. When Steve finally moved, it was with deliberate slowness. Turned to face Donald Patterson, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried throughout the studio with crystalline clarity. Every word was weighted with moral authority and controlled fury. "I need you to repeat what you just said," Steve began, his eyes locked on Donald Patterson with an intensity that made the other man shift uncomfortably. "I need everyone in this studio and everyone watching at home to hear it again, because I want to make absolutely certain that I understood you correctly. Did you just tell this family to know their place? Did you just suggest that their answer was not American enough? Did you just imply that they do not belong in this country?" Donald Patterson attempted to backtrack immediately, claiming his words were being misinterpreted, that he had not meant anything racist, that people were being too sensitive. He tried to laugh it off, to suggest he was just engaging in good-natured ribbing. But his excuses rang hollow, and his body language revealed someone who knew exactly what he had said and was now trying to avoid the consequences. Steve raised his hand to silence him. "No, sir, you do not get to walk that back. You do not get to pretend those words did not come out of your mouth. You told an American family, a family that has contributed more to this country than most people ever will, that they need to know their place. Let me tell you what I heard in those words. I heard the same racism that led to Japanese-American internment during World War II. I heard the same prejudice that resulted in the Chinese Exclusion Act. I heard the same hatred that has fueled the recent surge in violence against Asian Americans. I heard someone telling another human being that they are inferior, that they are foreign, that they do not belong." The studio audience began to murmur in agreement, but Steve was not finished. He turned to address the Chen family directly, and the fury in his voice when addressing Donald Patterson transformed into compassion and respect. "James, Margaret, David, Lisa, Michael, I need you to hear something from me," Steve said, his voice thick with emotion. "What this man just said to you is wrong. It is hateful, it is ignorant, and it reveals a sickness that has infected our society for far too long. You are Americans. This is your country just as much as it is anyone else's. You have earned your place here not because you have to prove anything to anyone, but because you are human beings with inherent dignity and worth. Steve walked closer to the Chen family, addressing each of them individually. James, you came to this country and worked as a janitor while fighting for the right to use your engineering degree. You spent 4 decades contributing to aerospace technology that has advanced our nation's capabilities and kept us competitive globally. You did not just earn your place. You built it with your hands and your mind and your refusal to give up in the face of discrimination. He turned to Margaret. You spent 38 years teaching mathematics to middle school students. You stayed late to tutor kids who struggled. You helped shape young minds and gave children the foundation they needed to succeed. How many engineers, doctors, teachers, and leaders are out there today because you believed in them and gave them the tools to learn? That is American. That is contribution. That is belonging. Steve addressed David. You are a trauma surgeon. You save lives. During the pandemic, you worked exhausting shifts, putting yourself at risk to care for patients. You treated people regardless of their race, their politics, their beliefs. Some of those people might have been the same ones who attacked Asian Americans in the streets, but you saved them anyway because that is what doctors do. And this man has the audacity to suggest you need to know your place. He looked at Lisa. You are a social worker helping immigrant and refugee families. You advocate for the most vulnerable people in our society. You fight for policy changes that make systems more just and accessible. That is patriotism. That is American values in action. Anyone who suggests otherwise does not understand what this country is supposed to stand for. Finally, Steve turned to Michael. You teach music to high school students and make arts education accessible to underprivileged kids. You give young people a chance to express themselves, to find joy, to discover talents they might never have known they had. You enrich your community and the lives of your students. That matters. That is valuable. That is American. The emotion in the studio was palpable. Several audience members were crying openly. The Chen family stood together, their pain visible but their dignity intact. And then Steve turned back to Donald Patterson, and the compassion in his voice vanished completely. Mr. Patterson, you want to talk about American values? Let me educate you. American values are about welcoming people from all over the world who want to build better lives. American values are about judging people by their character and contributions, not by their race or ethnicity. American values are about e pluribus unum, out of many, one. What you just demonstrated was not American values. That was racism, pure and simple. Steve continued, his voice growing stronger. You told this family to know their place. Well, let me tell you what their place is. Their place is standing on this stage as equals. Their place is in operating rooms saving lives, in classrooms shaping minds, in social service agencies helping families, in schools nurturing young talent. Their place is in this country, contributing to its strength and diversity. And your place, sir, is leaving this stage immediately because we do not tolerate racism here. The studio audience erupted in applause, a standing ovation that continued for several minutes. Donald Patterson protested, claiming his rights were being violated, that he was being persecuted for his beliefs. His family members stood in uncomfortable silence, some of them looking ashamed, others defensive. Steve did not waver. Sir, you have the right to your bigoted beliefs, but you do not have the right to express them on this stage without consequences. You do not have the right to participate in this show if you cannot treat all families with basic human dignity and respect. The Chen family came here to celebrate their bonds and have fun. You came here carrying prejudice, and when it revealed itself, you tried to pretend it was something other than what it was. You need to leave now. Security personnel arrived to escort the Patterson family from the studio. As they departed, Donald Patterson made additional comments about political correctness and cancel culture, revealing that he still did not understand the fundamental difference between freedom of speech and freedom from consequences. His inability to comprehend the harm he had caused was itself a form of violence, a refusal to acknowledge the humanity of those he had attacked. After the Patterson family left, Steve spent considerable time with the Chen family, ensuring they felt supported and valued. The production team paused the official taping to allow everyone to process what had happened. The producers agreed immediately with Steve's decision to air the incident in its entirety, recognizing that while it would be controversial, it was also an opportunity to address anti-Asian racism directly. During this extended break, James Chen spoke with Steve about the particular nature of anti-Asian racism and how it differs from discrimination faced by other minority groups. His words carried the weight of someone who had spent decades navigating these dynamics. Mr. Harvey, Asian Americans face a unique form of racism that often goes unrecognized or unacknowledged, James said, his accent still carrying traces of his Taiwanese heritage despite 46 years in America. We are told we are the model minority as if that were a compliment, but it is actually a weapon used to divide minority communities and to deny the real discrimination we face. When we succeed, people attribute it to natural ability rather than hard work. When we struggle, we are told we are not struggling enough to deserve help. And when we speak up about racism, we are told we are being too sensitive or that we have it better than others. David Chen, the trauma surgeon, added his perspective on the recent surge in anti-Asian violence. During the pandemic, I treated COVID patients while also experiencing a dramatic increase in verbal harassment and even physical threats because of my race. People blamed Asian Americans for a virus, as if we were collectively responsible. I had patients refuse my care because I am Asian, even though I was the most qualified person available to save their lives. And when I tried to talk about these experiences, I was told I was exaggerating or playing the victim. Lisa Chen spoke about the perpetual foreigner syndrome that Asian Americans face regardless of how many generations their families have been in America. I was born in San Francisco. My parents were born in America, but people still ask me where I am really from, as if I cannot possibly be American because of how I look. I am constantly told my English is good, as if it were surprising that a native-born American speaks English fluently. These microaggressions accumulate, creating a constant message that we do not fully belong. Margaret Chen, who had spent nearly 4 decades as a teacher, discussed how these dynamics played out in educational settings. Asian American students face tremendous pressure to excel academically, and when they do, their achievements are attributed to cultural factors rather than individual effort. When they struggle with mental health issues or need support, they are often overlooked because of assumptions that Asian families do not have problems. The model minority myth is crushing our children, creating impossible expectations, and denying them the help they need. Steve listened intently to each family member, and their testimonies deepened his understanding of anti-Asian racism and its particular manifestations. He shared with them his own commitment to using his platform to address all forms of racism and to stand in solidarity with every community facing discrimination. The decision was made to continue the taping with the Chen family competing in a special format that would celebrate their family and their contributions. Steve announced that in addition to their game winnings, he would personally establish a foundation to combat anti-Asian racism and to support Asian American communities. The foundation would focus on education, advocacy, and direct support for victims of hate crimes. When the episode aired 4 weeks later, it became one of the most discussed and analyzed episodes in Family Feud history. The network aired it during prime time with special framing that provided historical context about anti-Asian racism in America, from the Chinese Exclusion Act to Japanese American internment to the recent surge in hate crimes. They included resources for viewers who wanted to learn more and to support organizations working on Asian American civil rights. The response was immediate and multifaceted. Millions of people praised Steve Harvey for his powerful defense of the Chen family and for using his platform to address anti-Asian racism. Asian American communities across the country expressed deep gratitude for seeing their experiences validated and for witnessing someone with influence take a strong stand against the discrimination they faced. Civil rights organizations commended the decision to air the incident rather than burying it. However, there was also significant backlash revealing persistent misunderstandings about anti-Asian racism. Some viewers claimed Steve had overreacted, that Donald Patterson's comment was not that serious, that Asian Americans were too successful to be considered victims of racism. These responses demonstrated how the model minority myth functions to minimize and dismiss the real discrimination that Asian Americans experience. Steve addressed these criticisms directly and forcefully in multiple interviews. He explained that success does not immunize anyone from racism, that being told to know your place is unacceptable regardless of the target, and that the model minority myth itself is a racist construct designed to pit minority groups against each other. He pointed out that anti-Asian racism has a long and violent history in America, and that dismissing it because Asian Americans have achieved educational and economic success was itself a form of racism. The Chen family became unexpected advocates for Asian American civil rights. They gave interviews discussing their experiences and the broader patterns of discrimination facing their community. Chen spoke about the importance of intergenerational dialogue, helping younger Asian Americans understand the struggles their parents and grandparents faced, while also learning from the next generation about how to advocate more effectively for their rights. Chen used his platform as a physician to discuss the health impacts of racism, including the mental health toll of constant microaggressions and the very real physical danger of hate crimes. He collaborated with public health researchers to study the spike in anti-Asian violence during the pandemic and to develop interventions to support affected communities. Chen expanded her social work practice to focus specifically on supporting Asian American families dealing with trauma from racism and discrimination. She developed training programs for social workers and other service providers on the unique challenges facing Asian American communities and how to provide culturally competent care. The foundation that Steve established grew rapidly as donations poured in from individuals and organizations committed to fighting anti-Asian racism. Within the first year, the foundation provided support to dozens of victims of hate crimes, funded educational programs in schools about Asian American history and contributions, and supported advocacy organizations working on policy changes to protect Asian Americans from discrimination and violence. 1 year after the incident, the Chen family was invited back to Family Feud for a special anniversary episode. Steve welcomed them with genuine warmth, and the episode became a celebration of resilience, advocacy, and the progress that had been made while acknowledging how much work remained. The family shared updates on their lives and their ongoing commitment to fighting racism and supporting their community. The most powerful moment came when Chen, now 69 years old and recently retired from his aerospace career, presented Steve with a gift. It was a framed photograph showing 3 generations of the Chen family, including James's grandchildren, with a caption that read, "We belong. Thank you for defending our place." James explained that the photograph represented not just his family, but all the Asian American families who had been made to feel like perpetual foreigners in their own country. Steve accepted the gift with visible emotion and spoke about how the incident had changed him and deepened his commitment to fighting all forms of racism. He acknowledged that before meeting the Chen family, he had not fully understood the particular ways that anti-Asian racism manifested and how the model minority myth functioned to minimize real discrimination. He thanked the Chen family for educating him and for trusting him to use his platform responsibly. 3 years after the original incident, researchers studying hate speech and discrimination cited the Family Feud episode as a cultural turning point in awareness about anti-Asian racism. The phrase, "know your place," had been thoroughly examined and contextualized, helping millions of Americans understand how seemingly simple words could carry devastating historical weight and contemporary harm. Educational institutions incorporated the incident into curricula about racism, microaggressions, and allyship. Teachers used the footage to discuss how to be an active bystander when witnessing discrimination, how to support people who experience racism, and how to examine our own biases and assumptions about different communities. The Chen family's story inspired policy changes as well. Several states passed legislation strengthening hate crime protections and requiring cultural competency training for law enforcement and other public servants. The foundation Steve established became a national leader in combating anti-Asian racism, expanding its work to include research, advocacy, direct services, and educational programming. As this remarkable story reaches its conclusion, several profound lessons emerge. Anti-Asian racism is real and pervasive, taking forms that range from violence to microaggressions to the model minority myth that denies the discrimination Asian Americans face. Standing up against this racism requires understanding its particular manifestations and being willing to confront it even when it is disguised as compliments or expressed through coded language like telling people to know their place. Every community facing discrimination deserves allies who will use their platforms and voices to defend human dignity and to challenge systems and attitudes that perpetuate inequality. Steve Harvey's decision to freeze when confronted with Donald Patterson's racism, and then to respond with moral clarity and unwavering support for the Chen family, became a model for how to use influence responsibly. He demonstrated that sometimes the most important thing you can do is stop everything to address an injustice, to make it clear that hatred will not be tolerated, and to stand in solidarity with those who have been attacked. The Chen family's grace and their choice to transform pain into purpose provided inspiration for countless others facing discrimination. They showed that dignity cannot be taken away by another person's hatred, that responding to racism with education and advocacy can create meaningful change, and that sharing your story despite the vulnerability it requires can help others feel less alone and more empowered to demand respect. If this story moved you, if you believe that every family deserves respect and dignity regardless of their heritage or how long their families have been in America, make sure to like and subscribe. These are the stories that remind us of our shared responsibility to stand up against racism in all its forms, to support communities facing discrimination, and to create a society where no one is ever told to know their place because everyone's place is valued and secure.